we were having lunch at the Concerned Christian Conference, not you and I, but us all together in a room, and I overheard you talking about Mormonism, archaeology, maps, this kind of thing, and I said, this guy sounds like a wonderful guy to talk about this subject, because I was starting to have a lot of questions about it, especially as I started to interact with sort of Mormon apologists, like from FAIR and whatnot. How did you sort of get into this? Because I mean, here you're involved with a college ministry. Why are you talking about geography and archaeology in light of witnessing to Mormons? How did that evolution come about?
Well, I mean, if you're going to deal with Mormons, you have to go back to the root of Mormonism, which is Joseph Smith, and his number one production, which was the Book of Mormon. He produced the Book of Mormon. He offered it to the world, claimed that it was true history. And if you understand the roots of the Book of Mormon, what the storyline of the Book of Mormon is that it's a story of Israelites who came from Jerusalem in 600 BC, just before the Babylonian conquest of Judah, and they came to America on ships, and they started populating the American continents, and according to Mormonism, they became the Native Americans of America. That's where they came from.
Did you hear the synopsis of the Book of Mormon? That is the main part of the narrative. Now, they would say currently some slightly different things about the heritage of Native Americans, wouldn't they, Chip? And that's sort of part of the problem, and the confusion begins the minute we talk about that. What's the current day status on that sort of explicit or lack thereof claim in regard to Native American heritage?
Well, they're being forced by the facts to kind of expand their theories of the Book of Mormon. And early on, it was believed by the Mormon Church and all of the Mormon people, and it was taught by Joseph Smith and by the early prophets, that all of the Native Americans of North and South America, and even to the island peoples of the Hawaiian Islands and the Samoan Islands, that they were all related to this group of people that came from Israel in 600 BC. But now, with DNA studies being done, with archaeology being done all over North and South America, they don't have the facts to support what the Book of Mormon says. So now they're having to come up with what they call a limited geography theory of the Book of Mormon, where they're saying that instead of it being all of the Native Americans, it's just a very limited group of people in America, a civilization in America. And they were distinct at one time, but they have been absorbed into the much larger Native American population and have basically disappeared. And so that's what they're trying to say now.
Now, my question, though, is does the Book of Mormon support this shift in what they're saying?
No, actually, that's their biggest problem, is that their scriptures, the reason they believed originally that the land of the Americas was populated by these people from Israel is because it's what the Book of Mormon says in 2 Nephi chapter 1. So we're getting really early on in the Book of Mormon. It talks about them coming to the Americas, and it says that this land that they will be coming to will be kept from the knowledge of all other nations. And if they will be faithful to the Lord, God will let them prosper and fill the land. But if they won't be faithful, then there will come a time in the future when other nations will invade their country. But when they come here, according to what it says, let me just read it. It says, "And behold, it is wisdom that this land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, that there would be no place for an inheritance. Wherefore I, Lehi, have obtained a promise that inasmuch as those whom the Lord God shall bring out of the land of Jerusalem shall keep his commandments, they shall prosper upon the face of this land, and it shall be kept from all other nations, that they may possess this land unto themselves. And if it is so that they shall be kept, shall keep his commandments, they shall be blessed upon the face of this land, and there shall be none other to molest them, nor to take away the land of their inheritance, and they shall dwell safely forever." And then it says, "But if they aren't faithful, then other nations will come in and take the land away from them." And so this is where they get the idea that all of the Americas were populated by these people groups because nobody else was here.
Chip, how do the Mormons today understand the fulfillment of that prophecy?
Well, the Mormon people still believe that all of the Native Americans are what they would call Lamanites, which are the descendants of Lehi who came out of Jerusalem. But the scholars are backpedaling on that because the facts don't support it. So the people still believe that. The scholars are backpedaling.
Well, Chip, who are some of these scholars? Who are some of the LDS or BYU scholars that are sort of commenting on this? Who are they? Tell us about them briefly if you can.
Well, there's an apologetic group based off of the BYU campus in Provo, Utah, called the Neil L. Maxwell Institute. It's formerly called FARMS, and they have a number of scholars that try to defend the Mormon Church and try to defend the geography and all of that kind of stuff. Then there's a researcher named Rod Meldrum. He's from the east part of the United States. I'm not sure exactly where his hometown is, but he is popularizing a view that it was a very limited geography in New York State or in that area. And then there are other archaeologists. I've talked with an archaeologist at BYU named Dr. Kerry Muhlestein, who is an Egyptologist there, and I've talked with him about this topic. And so there's a number of different people, but the thing that's interesting is that according to Dr. Muhlestein at BYU, there's no agreement amongst the scholars. He basically told us that some people believe it's Central America, other people believe possibly the Baja Peninsula, other people believe New York State, and amongst the scholars, they have no agreement even where to start looking because they haven't found anything yet.
Well, I want to hear more about some of these conversations that you have had with some of these guys to sort of get an idea of what they're saying, because a lot of times when I talk to the average Mormon, like you said, they say, well, yeah, we have archaeological proof, maybe not as much as you would want, but, I talked to so-and-so or read this or whatever, and there is proof that these events took place. Talk to you on the other side of the break, Chip. In a minute, Backpack Radio will be back.
Okay. Well, I had a very interesting discussion with one of the BYU professors, Dr. Muhlestein, who's an Egyptologist, and I had the privilege of taking a biblical archaeologist, Dr. Bryant Wood, that works for Associates for Biblical Research with me to BYU. And we sat down with Dr. Muhlestein and just discussed this whole topic of geography and the Book of Mormon and where they believe these things happened. And I was really, really impressed with Dr. Muhlestein as being a very honest apologist. He does believe with all of his heart the Book of Mormon is true, but he is honest enough to admit that they have not located the civilizations of any of the Nephite or the Lamanite people groups yet. He's honest enough to admit that Central America doesn't fit the geography, or the people groups. The history doesn't fit. The North America doesn't fit. He's not sure where even to look, and he says that the scholars in the Mormon Church don't have any agreement on where to even look. So at this point, they haven't located any of the cities, any of the history. There are no manuscripts of the Book of Mormon that predate Joseph Smith. It's pretty cut and dry that they've got a big problem.
So, given that, you said, but he still really believes in the Mormon faith. Is it just simply that they're hoping and trusting, and eventually there'll be this treasure trove of archaeological evidence that will confirm everything at some point?
Yeah, when I asked him, how do you deal with this, he said, well, just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's true. Just they haven't, it doesn't exist, except that if they were the kind of cultures the Book of Mormon talks about, we're talking about battles where literally it's listed hundreds of thousands of people that died in these battles. If they were battles on those kind of magnitudes, they wouldn't be small, isolated cultures. They would be huge cultures like the Assyrian culture, or the Babylonian culture, or the Greek or Roman. It would be a huge culture. They couldn't disappear. And so they've got a real dilemma on their hands.
And in those type of, in other similar examples in history, when there's battles like that involving really major civilizations, we have evidence. They do leave some type of record.
Oh yeah, we know exactly where the battles took place. We can go to those battlefields and pick up war implements off the battlefields anytime.
Is that because of that problem? Is there a movement to spiritualize much of that history? That may be problematic, I realize, but does that happen?
There's a small movement, but I don't think most people are buying into doing that. Because if they do that, it discredits Joseph Smith, because he definitely claimed it was true history.
So most of the believers are saying we believe it. We haven't been able to prove it yet, but that doesn't prove it's not there. That's sort of the bottom line.
Yeah, no, actually, most of the Mormons are saying we have all the evidence we need, and we believe it's true, and you can't just prove it. It's the scholars that are saying we don't have anything to show you.
I wonder if... go ahead.
It's Mormon folklore that there's lots of evidence. I mean, if you go up to Salt Lake City, you can take a tour to Central America, and it's called the Book of Mormon tour. They're telling their people that the Mayan, Aztec civilizations are the Book of Mormon history groups, the people groups. And so they take them on tours there. And Dr. Muhlestein, when we were talking to him, he says they should not call it that. They have no connection.
Wow.
Now, Chip, that's not the only tour that's going on. That one sounds a little more official, but tell us about some of these other tours and the strange fact that they're visiting entirely different locations. This is an interesting phenomenon. Lay it out for us, if you could, about these guided tours.
Well, I mean, Rod Meldrum will take you and explain to you all of the facts surrounding New York State. And you can go to New York State, visit the site Cumorah. The Mormon Prophets in Doctrines of Salvation by Joseph Fielding Smith lay it out that the hill Cumorah in New York State is the hill where the battle took place. There's no question about it. If you study these passages, Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 3, pages 232 through 239, they just lay it out that all of the early prophets said that the hill Cumorah was the place. But now the scholars are saying there has to be more than one hill Cumorah, because there's no way that they could have carried the gold plates that the Book of Mormon was supposedly written on all the way from Central America and planted them up in New York State. And so now they're saying that there must be another hill Cumorah down in Central America somewhere.
So if you don't have these folks sort of living, breathing, and moving in the North American continent, if you got them sort of down south, what you got to do is you got to have them migrate to fight in what would eventually become Joseph Smith's hood, right? Because they're saying, look, it took place down south, however, this final battle happened. But now you're saying, some people are saying, well, maybe even the final battle happened down somewhere else, correct?
Yeah, because they know from their work that they've done at the hill Cumorah that it's not a battle. There's no war implements. There's no evidence of a battle that took place there. So now they have to come up with another excuse, which is there must be another Cumorah.
Yeah, this is interesting, and I'm not trying to be funny about this, but my understanding is relatively recently, I think in the 20th century, when the LDS Church was going to sort of make a final sort of half-hearted apology for what happened down in southern Utah with the Mountain Meadows Massacre. As they began the project, they did indeed uncover bones and implements of warfare, which sort of was a grisly sight. And, they're uncovering archaeological evidence to a fact that's really sort of been whitewashed out of LDS history. Then they go to these other places where they wish they could find it and nary a thing. It's ironic, but it's really sad. I don't say this in a light, jesting way. This is a sad thing.
Oh, yeah. It's very sad, and the people are being deceived. I mean, the people are being lied to. Most people believe there's plenty of evidence, but if you ask them, well, show it to me, nobody can show you anything. And that was what we asked Dr. Muhlestein, was to show us some Nephite or Lamanite pottery that would correlate with the Hebrew pottery that Dr. Wood looks at every day over in Israel. And he said, well, I can't show you anything because we haven't found it yet.
So Dr. Wood, who did a PhD in this, goes in and says, hey, can you show me some of the Nephite pottery? And it's almost like a trick question, which for people to understand, I'm not an expert in this, but pottery is galore in the dirt. That's what you're going to find if you find something about a people's record. And there is no Nephite pottery to speak of. And that's what he told Wood, right?
Yeah, well, he said we may have found something to look at, but we don't know if it's Nephite or not because we haven't identified those cultures yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real thing. I'm sitting here holding in my hands a beautifully photographed book called An LDS Guide to Mesoamerica. Daniel Johnson, Jared Cooper, and Derek Gasser. Great photographs, actually sort of interesting. I mean, if you look at it, just learning about some of the peoples and the layout of the land. However they do it, and they're sort of doing it with the idea of, hey, we're going through, and this could be this site, this could be that site, this could represent this. It's super speculative if you really read it with just a semi-observant eye, but it gives you the impression, hey, these are the places, and we're sort of going through. Maybe there's a little tweaking to take place, but we've sort of got it. And if you go into a Seagull Books, a Mormon bookstore, or Deseret Books, you'll find a bunch of books like this. So this stuff's being promulgated on the popular culture. All right, Chip, when we come back, we're going to talk more about that, and we're going to ask you this question: why aren't there any maps in the back of the Book of Mormon? Vocab BPR. Peace.
It's Backpack Radio. Good to be here. And good to have you all listening. And we are here with Chip Thompson, director, pastor, evangelist, apologist. He wears many, many hats, but he's here particularly to talk to us about how we might better engage Mormons, particularly in an area of geography. And it's been a really interesting discussion so far. And at the end of last segment, we asked an intentionally provocative question: why aren't there any maps in the back of the Book of Mormon? And, well, let me just let you take it away from there, Chip.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's obvious they have nothing to base it on. Oh, there's no archaeology to say this is where these places took these events took place. These places existed. There's no way for them to know that. I think probably one of the most important things that I need to bring up in this whole topic is this researcher named Rod Meldrum. There's a lot of Mormon people that are really buying into his theories on that the Book of Mormon lands are New York State. And I talked with him this last summer for quite a while at the Mormon Miracle Pageant in Manta, Utah, and asked him about some of his research and different things. And then I posed what I think are the most serious questions to his whole theory. And I said, you're supposed to be a member of a church that has living prophets. And right now there's all kinds of turmoil within your religion because they can't locate these lands. Why don't your prophets do that? Why don't they locate these lands? And he just shook his head and said, I don't know. And I asked him, I said, are your research, is the Mormon Church supporting you and helping you with your research? He said, no, they're not. And I said, well, if you're finding evidence, why aren't they behind you? And he said, well, they just aren't willing to open their eyes and look at what I'm finding. And I said, well, here's your real problem. Number one, the Book of Mormon, which we read the passage from, says that land would be uninhabited, that it was uninhabited, that no other nations knew about this land. So what you're telling me about the small geography of the New York State is that we're surrounded by Indians, and they were just a very small culture, but it's disagreeing with the Book of Mormon. And then it's also disagreeing with Mormon prophets. Spencer Kimball, in a conference talked about the Lamanites and all of the different people groups of the Lamanites, and some of the quotes that he makes is that they're all of the people of North and South America, all of the people. It says such as the Polynesians, the Guatemalans, the Peruvians, the Sioux, the Apaches, the Mohawks, the Navajo, and others. It's a large group of great people. And I said, how in the world can Spencer Kimball say that all of the Native Americans are the Lamanites, and you're saying it's an isolated small group in New York State?
Right.
And it just deflated him.
Wow.
You're not a very nice guy, Chip. Now, question, that is similar to something that was said at the dedication of a temple down in South America, was it not? Do you have sort of those quotes paraphrased in your head? You and I talked briefly about this.
I've got the quote right in front of me here. This is in the 1971 July edition of the Ensign magazine, and President Hinckley recognized the Book of Mormon heritage of his listeners in Lima, Peru, when he was dedicating the temple there. And he said, as I look into your faces, I think Father Lehi, whose sons and daughters you are, must be shedding tears of joy today, tears of love and gratitude. And so he basically told the people in Lima, Peru, that they were the direct descendants of Father Lehi in Peru.
Yeah.
And there again, when I presented that to Rod Meldrum, his face the blood drained out of his face, because that doesn't fit his theory at all. It won't work.
And how can he go against a living prophet, really, of any era?
Right.
See, the real reason I wanted to ask this question is I think we've established there's no evidence. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the more interesting thing is there's no official position It's sort of danced around, whereas it used to be more sort of firmly entrenched.
It's almost avoided.
Yeah, but it's really changed. Is that basically what we're getting at here, Chip?
Yeah, today in the Mormon Church, there is no official position. But as I said earlier on, there were official positions established by the prophet Joseph Fielding Smith in Doctrines of Salvation. He lays it out, an official statement from the prophet and official prophecies from Joseph Smith that lays it out that the Hill Cumorah is the place where those battles took place.
Yeah. Pastor Bob, you had something?
Well, I was going to ask, but maybe it's a good place to start in the last segment. In terms of how this is working in your evangelism efforts. Chip, I'm really interested, even with this fellow that you talked about that had the New York City philosophy, he was deflated. Do you think he's questioning the Book of Mormon? Is he still a true believer and basically just thinks the answers are yet to be found? We're coming up.
The answer is on the surface they're not questioning. If you look at them, they don't like to show any weakness in their faith at all. But in their heart, they have to be questioning.
Yeah. All right, well, good segment. We got a final segment left. We'll try to dig deep, pun intended, and really see what was Joseph Smith's view on this. Backpack Radio, back in a bit.
I mean, and what are some of the things that we want to say about biblical archaeology in contrast with Mormon archaeology?
Yeah, actually, the Mormon scholars, when they're attacked on the lack of archaeology for the Book of Mormon, their typical response is to say, well, there are questions about the Bible, too.
Yeah.
For instance, Kathleen Kenyon says there were no walls in Jericho when Joshua arrived there. And they're using the humanist, secular archaeologists, the atheist positions to try to make it look like everything isn't, like we have the same kind of problems they have.
Yeah.
But that's completely false. I've been to Israel 3 times, and I've spent multiple days in multiple sites that are biblical sites. We know exactly where virtually every major city of the Bible is. We know where the rivers are. We know where the lakes are. We know where the battles took place. We can excavate down through different layers of history of the Bible. When you go to Israel, you're walking on the Bible everywhere you go. And a lot of the Jewish archaeologists that believe in the Old Testament of the Bible, they believe it's true history. There's no doubt in their mind because they dig it every day. When it comes to the Book of Mormon, they can't go dig it because they can't find it, and so it's completely different. They may question how they interpret their findings in Palestine. The secular humanists try to interpret it to be a non-biblical interpretation. The biblical guys try to interpret it to be a biblical interpretation. But there's no doubt that the cities, the history, the kings, the people, they all existed exactly as the Bible described, and they can't find any of that in the Americas. They can't find any of that history, any of those cities, any of the lakes or the geography. They don't know where to look.
Yeah, our friend McKay V. Jones specifically mentioned as a counterpoint to some of this that, well, we don't know anything about the Exodus. There's not much evidence for that. Now, the Exodus is one of the more sort of open fields as far as biblical archaeology. That's a true enough statement, but it's interesting if the Book of Mormon and the religion of Mormonism says it sits on the foundation of the Bible. Are they really helping themselves? Because it's almost like, hey, it's like you have a flat tire. No, I have 2 flat tires. Now what? You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting thought, but this is interesting. We're talking mainly about America's. But in the book, The New Mormon Challenge, there's only a brief few pages on this. But in that book, there's a section where they briefly discuss the Book of Mormon's claims about Middle Eastern archaeology as well. Huh. And it's so vague, the descriptions that Joseph Smith gives of their sort of root out of Israel, that no one really knows what it is or what it's saying or trying to say. And it's not really helpful there either. No one really knows what it is. And to make matters worse, you have the people having things like compasses, which didn't exist then. And then when they come over here, they have steel bows, which that was not something they had either. There's horses, which they didn't have those. There's silk, they didn't have those. You go down this list, and the problems start to increase exponentially. To say the Bible is a sure foundation, the Book of Mormon is not. And, if you really want to know more about this, guys, this is sort of a beginner's place to go. Get the Archaeological Study Bible. It's a big old door stopper, and it is just filled with little facts and cross-references throughout history and archaeology. When a place is mentioned, you have a little snapshot of the data right there in front of you in this great resource, the Archaeological Study Bible.
And not all from Christians. It's from just regular archaeologists doing work, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of people interested in what's sort of sometimes called biblical archaeology. Another sort of good, these are intro books, is The Stones Cry Out by Randall Price, What Archaeology Reveals About the Truth of the Bible. Now, there's much more detailed technical things we can do, but those are good places to sort of start. Anything else about that, Chip, before we move on to a few other questions we have in this segment?
Well, I think there's some really great articles that Institute for Religious Research has on their websites that address this geography and DNA issues and all these different. And so people could go to the Institute for Religious Research, to their website. They've got some really solid articles on those issues.
Oh, I would like to see those because, as I started to kind of dive into this, I didn't see much about this question as I sort of had hoped. Some of the things were outdated. Most of the stuff I found were from FAIR, and putting forth the limited geography theory as opposed to really Christians interacting with this. And that's good. So the Institute for Religious Research, IRR.org, right, does have some stuff. Okay, good stuff. Now, question, can we ascertain, and if so, does it conflict with a lot of the theories being put forth now, Joseph Smith's original view and understanding of what he was telling people in this regard? So when we talk about DNA, archaeology, geography, did he seem to hint towards it or tell us?
Oh, Joseph Smith was very clear. And again, in this book, Doctrines of Salvation by Joseph Fielding Smith, he's got a section in it that says Joseph Smith locates Cumorah in western New York.
Okay, so what are you going to do with that?
So, Chip, my follow-up question is then, what do you think was in the mind of Joseph Smith, why he would do that? What was he trying to accomplish? Was he making it up? What do you think was going on?
Well, there was several written works during Joseph Smith's lifetime prior to the writing of the Book of Mormon. A view of the Hebrews. They were questioning these same things that Joseph Smith was questioning, and they were proposing the idea that maybe the Native Americans were Israelites that had come over. So it wasn't something Joseph Smith came up with. It was a part of the discovery process of the early Americas to try to figure out where in the world did these Native Americans come from in the first place. And now we know, because of the DNA work that's done, we know that every tribe in North and South America, they all came from Northeast Asia. They're related to the Mongolian people.
And there's a good DVD on that called DNA in the Book of Mormon.
Right. Now, DNA versus the Book of Mormon.
Oh, yep. Versus. Now, what about this? When Joseph Smith said something like this, I'm going to tell you about the inhabitants of this continent. Doesn't he say something like that? Yep. And when I brought that up, Mormon apologists say, oh, yeah, well, what do you think this continent is? You don't think North and South America are attached? What do I do?
Yeah, that's a good point. They like to play with words. They don't like to admit that this continent has to mean the North American continent.
Well, could it? Because I looked up some dictionaries and tried to figure out what people would mean by that word then, and it seemed that there was some truth that it possibly could have meant then the larger sort of North and South continent. I don't know if that's true, though.
To me, it doesn't matter. Give them South America. Find it.
Okay. Well, there you go. I guess we could do that instead.
And they've been doing archaeology in South America for 50 years, and they can't find it. So it's not there either.
So, Chip, and I don't know what order of questions, can we turn this into how this is working in your work as an evangelist, and maybe for our listeners and for me too? What can we learn about, for those of us who know just a little about these problems and not the knowledge you have, how do we use it when we go to our friend or neighbor that is an LDS member and really hope to encourage them towards the true gospel?
Well, there are a couple of DVDs. One of them is the Bible versus the Book of Mormon, and it just shows that there's all kinds of archaeology that we can look at in Palestine and Israel. And they also go down to South America, and they interview archaeologists down there, and they can't find anything down there. The thing that I do is I like to show them the support that we have for the Bible. I go to great lengths. In fact, we've built a Bible museum in our ministry house where we can show people the history that we can find that relates to the Bible, and then basically challenge them, why can't you find this kind of history to show the Book of Mormon? It's even historical.
Yeah.
And it just plants a seed. It makes them think.
Is that methodology, have you seen some success by the power of God's Spirit, or how is that working? Is that are they catching it, or are they basically saying, well, I have faith, it doesn't really matter?
I think it's a powerful seed that's being planted in their thinking. And I've asked, hundreds probably of Mormons, can you show me something substantial, archaeology, to show me where these cities were? And I send them home with that assignment, and I give them my email. I say, here's my email. You go home and you find archaeology that directly links to the Book of Mormon, and I want to see it because I've looked for it and I can't find it. And those are seeds that you plant into their mind that causes them to start doubting whether or not that's true. But I think it's equally important to tell them, look, the Bible is substantiated. It is true. The history is not questioned. It really is what it claimed to be. And if you're going to trust one or the other, would you rather trust the book that has mountains of evidence, or would you rather trust the book that it's only true because Joseph Smith said so?
So what do you think of this book, An LDS Guide to Mesoamerica, that Vocab mentioned earlier, Johnson, Cooper, and Gasser?
Yeah, I have a similar book. It's called Images of Ancient America by John L. Sorensen. These books are interesting because they show them ancient history, and then they have a lot of pictures that say this could be like.
Yeah.
This might be what so-and-so's crown looked like. This could be similar to the site where this event happened in the Book of Mormon, but they can't say this is the site.
And the LDS scholars would agree with that, like the gentleman you respected at BYU.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I tell you, Chip, as I was going through this book, and this is just one I happened to pick up because I went into Seagull Books, and they actually had some really good homeschool supplies, so I bought them there. I mean, if I'm going to buy stuff from Barnes & Noble, why can't I buy stuff from there? And they have some good products, and this one is really nice, but it was on sale, so I picked it up. There was other ones I saw, but they were a little more pricey because of all the photographs. And there was a part in here I was reading, and because remember, guys, a big part of this is Jesus Christ did a U-turn when he ascended. He came back over here somewhere and preached to the natives at the time. Remember, that's why you see those pictures with Jesus and sort of doing a Sermon on the Mount, but everyone has like head bonnets on and stuff. Well, that's why. So they sort of look for sort of remnants of Christianity. And one of the quotes in this book said, well, we were looking through sort of the icons of the deities from these folks and these different places and tribes and villages and towns. And, this god was this way and this god was that way. And they would say, it's true, we didn't really see anything that would have gave us evidence that Christianity had any way established a foothold. But we would expect that because it had pretty much been wiped out by the wickedness and all this. But then they said, but it is interesting that you see characteristics of God, a little bit in each deity. Maybe they sort of spread out the characters of Jesus Christ to each deity. So one is, able to be the God of truth, and this one does that, and this one does that. I'm paraphrasing a bit. I don't have the page in front of me. I was looking for it. But I remember reading that and saying, that's a stretch, because every culture that's polytheistic has gods who have a little bit of this power and a little bit of that power. And it was just like, as you're reading it, I could see why more might say, oh, that sounds kind of convincing. But if you just kind of step back, you say, that's a really silly argument. Like, the evidence is because they were polytheistic and each god had power, so maybe Jesus did visit here. I mean, do you follow the sort of train that was trying to be driven through there? Oh, Chip? Is Chip still around?
I'm still here.
Oh,
yeah,
I went too long.
Or he didn't follow it.
Questions that they asked to convince their people that this could be true. But the bottom line is the evidence that we need to support it, this concrete evidence, just doesn't exist. I think probably one of the most damning evidences against them is that we literally have tens of thousands of ancient hand-copied biblical manuscripts, Greek, Aramaic, Latin, Coptic, you name it. We've got all of these ancient translations of the Bible. They have nothing that predates Joseph Smith.
Word,
The
what a
only thing they
contrast.
claim that they
Chip,
did-
thank you very much for joining us. Tri-Grace Ministries, Book of Mormon, Geography, where it be, I don't know. Peace.
Backpack Radio.